Hey everybody, it's Susie McMahon with my virtual book club, Susie L. McMahon's virtual book club, coming to you guys live. I'm in South Carolina, and our featured author tonight is Sarah McGraw Crow. Welcome back, Sarah. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Susie?
I'm good. We were just chatting. Let's chat about the weather for just a quick second while people roll in. Um, so I'm in South Carolina. It was 63 today, pretty blustery and stormy, but still warm. What are you experiencing up there in Vermont?
In New Hampshire, which is next
I
to
mean, New
Vermont.
Hampshire. I meant that. I'm being stupid. I'm sorry.
So it was not a balmy 63 degrees. It was probably like 28 and snowing in the morning, and then it stopped in the middle of the day, and now it's snowing again. So it's definitely winter now.
It definitely is. So I just wanted to say hi to the members of our group that are watching right now. If you're new to watching this live in our Facebook group, please make sure to grant StreamYard permission to use your name, because otherwise the way it pops up is just Facebook user. I see someone who said, hi, Susie and Sarah, but I'm not sure who that is. So hello there. You guys, I hope that you missed me as much as I missed you. We got a little, it's December, and we read, Sarah, didn't we start kind of in October, and then we were going to do November, but we had, your book was so popularly being purchased, it took us a while to get them out to everybody for the personal orders. So we wanted to make sure everyone had a chance to read your debut novel. So, Karen is who said hi. So my friend Karen is watching. Sarah, a lot of the questions, we're going to jump in and do about 15 minutes of interactive questions before we have a surprise guest today. And a lot of the questions I know the answer to, but I'm going to act like I don't. So, because I received this multiple times. And the first thing off is, where did you get the inspiration for your book, for your debut novel? And then I'll have a follow-up. Go ahead.
Sure. So I guess a couple of places. I should say that Clarendon College in the novel is loosely based on Dartmouth College in New Hampshire before coeducation, when it was a lot more like Animal House, I would say, for those of us who remember that reference. And I graduated from Dartmouth in the late 80s, and it was co-ed, and I had a good co-ed college experience, but there were definitely reminders of that all-male Animal House time. And when I was there and ever after, I just wondered, like, what was it like if you were, if you would have been one of the first women working there, or the first exchange students that they let in, or one of the first real students they let in, because the school did not make it easy for women. And so that was just kind of in the back of my head. And then the other thing is that I have been writing about kind of people in my parents' generation for basically since I started writing fiction. I just have this, I guess, fascination with that generation, mostly with women, and how did they deal with the choices they had and didn't have when they were, let's say they were young in the 40s or 50s. Like, let's say you wanted to do something more ambitious than be a teacher or a nurse, which was sort of where women were directed in those days. And what kind of pushback you would have had to deal with, and whether you could have had the confidence to go on. So those are sort of two separate things that were percolating in the back of my head. But when I first started writing this, I was just writing pages about Virginia and Oliver, and thinking I was writing about a marriage, which I was, but that's really all I was thinking about at first.
So I think you just answered it. So as part of the inspiration came from your own college years, but you had an interest of the generation ahead of you, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I should add that I also just have this kind of affection for the 70s, and just kind of wanting to spend time in that period. It just sort of flowed into my writing as well.
That's wonderful. And I'm so silly. We were chatting so much before. I forget that I normally start by reading a bio, but I think everyone is familiar with you, Sarah. We've had you come on when Catherine had referred you, and then you joined us shortly at the end of our meeting with the author Catherine Reed, who wrote her memoir of
Yes.
walking the trails. I'm going to lead into a heavy question based on that. I mean, the last meeting when I was talking with her, I don't know if you know, but in her memoir, she uses her own personal um, story of sexual assault that she experienced in her memoir, Alone in Wonderland. And at the time, I had not even started reading your book. And I'm noticing just in our culture, it seems like so many women can relate to Rebecca's experience. Am I using the right character?
Yeah.
At the fraternity house. I can say personally, I can say that. Does it seem to you like more women are openly talking about possible or near real sexual assault situations or near misses? And do you think it's just commonplace conversation as a result of the Me Too movement? And what's your thoughts on that?
I have so many thoughts and they're not well articulated, but I would say that probably all of the above, because I think of myself in high school or college, we didn't really have the language for that. You know, if things were happening in the fraternities, they were not spoken of. If something happened to a young woman, she might not even tell her friends, never mind telling the police or whoever. I think um, that's been a sea change for the better, that people kind of recognize it for what it is and have a name for it that they didn't have 30 or more years ago. So I don't know. I do think there's also that aspect of people coming forward now with stories from long ago. I've seen that happen with a bunch of people in public life, like our congresswoman talked about an assault she suffered when she was in college that she'd never spoken of because she was so mortified and embarrassed about it. So um, yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't have a great answer.
No, but I mean, it's just
Mhm.
I just wanted to have conversation because it's kind of like this aha moment. And I agree. There's changes in culture where it becomes more commonplace that more of us talk about it
Mhm.
without, I guess, shame or fear now, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah.
Um, so more and more ladies are joining me. I received a few messages. Are you on? Where are you? We're in
Mhm.
the group, like always,
Mhm.
with this going live. So I had another question from my helper who sometimes helps facilitate meetings. Her name is Melissa. And she said, as a native Marylander, the description of eating crabs made her salivate. But but she wasn't satisfied enough to ignore, here's another cultural thing right now, the white privilege comments made by her dinner date. Sounds like you have eaten Maryland crabs, steamed crabs yourself. Have you?
Well, yeah, because I grew up in Norfolk, which is on the Chesapeake Bay, the other end. And yes, crabs are everywhere, and I do prefer a soft shell crab when I can get one. Um, yeah, I that was I that scene that she's referencing is a very awkward first date with a guy who's sort of a blowhard, and that Virginia's remembering that she had had to go through. So, um, yeah, um, but yes, I do love crabs.
Now, when you have a soft shell crab, because I love crab, but I'm not a huge fan of soft shell. But I think it's because the only way I've had it is fried here in South
Mhm.
Carolina. How do you have shell? The
That's the
same?
only really, yeah, pretty much like as a sandwich, as a soft shell
Mhm.
crab sandwich. That's usually if there's one of those on the menu, I will definitely order it,
Okay.
and
I
it's
was
less
at a
work.
Yeah, I was at a yeah, definitely. I was at a small little restaurant nearby. It's called Johnson Creek Tavern. It's right off um, Fripp Island and Hunting Island in the Low Country. And two people came in asking for that, and I was like, I don't think it's the right season for that. So
Yeah,
that
it's
was
only
good.
some of the time, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So another question that was sent in beforehand, and you was from Shoshana, and she's in Texas.
Mhm.
We've talked about it earlier, what inspired you to get this, the subject matter of the early 1970s. But her follow-up question was, she heard or has read that you were writing another book at the time that you got involved with writing The Wrong Kind of Woman. Are
Mhm.
you back working on that book, or is it just in a box somewhere, or what are you working on now?
Yeah, that novel is in the drawer and it's probably not coming out again. It was a historical novel, actually, about the sister of the artist John Singer Sargent. So nothing like this one. And the time span was completely different. It covered about 50 years, I would say. So it was just a completely different sort of novel. And I spent many years working on it, maybe 8 years, I think. And that's the novel that got me an agent, and ultimately didn't sell. But so while I was querying agents, and then later while my agent was submitting it to editors, I had been given the advice by another writer to start something new and focus on that. And so I did, and I started working on this story that was just like some pages about some woman in the early 70s and not really thinking about where it was going. And that was such a relief to be in the 20th century and to be in the US, because that previous novel, even though John Singer Sargent was American, he never lived in the US. He lived in London and Paris, and as did his family. So it was just at that moment, it felt like this is just a relief to be writing these pages. And so that probably took about 3 years total, I would say. I wasn't working on it full time because there were other times when I would be revising the previous novel, or I had gone back to grad school and I was doing that too. So it's a little hard to figure out the time frame. But I don't think I will go back to that novel because it did make the rounds, and I I mean, never say never, but right now I'm working on something that's set in the early '80s. So,
Fun.
um,
Are you
yeah,
going to keep going by
yeah.
decade? 70s, 80s, 90s,
Right.
and
I
then
think
where
I
we
guess maybe moving forward, yes. Mhm.
Well, this question wasn't sent in, but I am excited. Do you have a copy of your paperback with you or a picture of it? I forgot to ask
Oh,
before we got
I
started.
yeah, I don't have
Okay.
anything,
Okay.
no.
We'll post it again. It was
Okay.
posted in the group today, you guys. It's a beautiful cover. Tell
Mhm.
me about the transition from the hardback cover to the new one, and why you did that, or who consulted you, or whatever. It's really beautiful. I love the colors.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's sometimes there will be a big change from the hardcover to the paperback, and sometimes not, and it can be for all different reasons. And I mean, I guess the ultimate reason is they want to try to attract a different group of readers with a
Mhm.
different cover. Also, I think paperback buyers can be different than hardcover buyers. But I didn't really have any. So they had come up with a previous new cover that was more almost cartoonish and graphic, and it was sort of muted. And it turns out the salespeople didn't love that cover, so they scrapped it and started again and made this other one, which is really not muted at all. It's very orange and red and yellow, and it's just very vivid. And I'm sorry, I don't have a
I could probably
any.
I can try to share a screen, while we're doing something else, and, we can show it. So
Yeah,
I don't wanna type and ruin
right,
ruin the
right.
screen, so I'll
Yeah,
do that in a second when I'm not talking at the same time, chewing gum, patting my head, and all
yeah,
that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Well, let me ask you one more question. This is another one from Melissa, and
Hmm.
she has stated a conflict resolutionist once said, "It takes all types of initiatives to counter injustices." This was apparent in your book too, with the violent and the nonviolent approaches. Can you talk about your decision to write about both of those approaches? Excuse me.
Oh, sure. So it's kind of funny because I do feel like most of the people in this book are not particularly politically active or savvy, and they kind of blunder into whatever it is they're doing. Um, so part of that had to do with, I guess, age. Virginia's in her early 40s, and the women around her are around the same age too. So they're obviously, or not obviously, but in my mind, they were not going to do something radical. And what they did was really very modest, and still they got into trouble. And then the students who were getting into more radical activities like Elodie, I wanted Elodie to be sort of a cipher, and because I, as the writer who was thinking about her as a character, could never really figure out, is she a true believer, or is she just sort of posing because she thinks it's cool and it's sort of adding to her charisma? And Sam, because he wants to impress Elodie, is willing to go along with this, and also because he's a little bit at the end of his rope, and he's just he's lonely and maybe not doing so well. So I guess those are more story decisions than political decisions. It's thinking more of like, what would this character do and what would that character do, I would say.
And one more question before we have an introduction to make. When you wrote this question came from Francine Katz, and several of her questions we've already answered. But do you write from beginning to end? Did you write from beginning to end?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I would say sort of, but not exactly, because when you first write pages, you have just these like little blurts of scenes or a character's thoughts or memories, and it's all kind of it's a mush, I guess. And then when you come back around to it, you're trying to impose a little bit of a framework or a timeline or something like that. And I honestly don't remember at what point that I realized, oh, this is going to be about a year or 6 months leading up to the coeducation decision, and kind of plugging things in. I did that at some point, but I don't remember when. But I wish I could say that I wrote chronologically or, forward with the story or the narrative, but I'm not sure that I do. And probably a more efficient writer would do that. And I haven't figured that out quite yet.
Well, it's definitely a craft that I've never. I had to take English 101 in college, I think 3 or 4 times. So I'm just I like to talk, but yikes for writing. At this point in the night, Sarah, I'm so excited. We have a surprise guest in the wings, and I was going to turn the meeting over to you to begin an introduction of this future featured author, and then I will bring her on, and we're going to interact for the rest of our meeting with the three of us. And if anyone that is watching did not send in a question and has a specific question for Sarah or for our future to be known author, please put them in the comments, and I will be looking at my phone and also on this one stream that I'm watching to try to address those. So Sarah, the floor is all yours.
Okay. Well, I'm really happy to introduce another debut novelist, and her novel came out in 2020, as mine did. And I've gotten to know her as we have moved through this weird pandemic publishing time. And her name is Fionnuala Austin. There she is. So Fionnuala, I will first quickly say Fionnuala is the author of Bronte's Mistress, beautiful and smart historical novel. And just a little background about Fionnuala. She born in England, but grew up mostly in Ireland, and went to high school in Ireland, but then went to college in England. She has 2 degrees from Oxford University, 2 different colleges at Oxford, which is amazing. And one is a master's in, I think, Victorian literature, pretty much, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, yeah. And now Fionnuala lives in New York City, and what else can I say? Works in digital advertising. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yes.
you've got it down. Thanks, Sarah. That was like such a comprehensive bio. I'm really happy to be here.
Welcome. I'm so glad you're here as well. For everybody, we got to chat a little bit before. that we started, and I'm just so excited to hear more about your book, about your novel. It was a debut novel, is that correct? Last 2020, or that was over a year ago now, but in 2020, right?
That's correct. And obviously, I was listening to you guys before I joined you live and talking about paperback versus hardback cover. And I have my paperback here, so you can see hardcover, paperback, very different. So I had that same experience that Sarah did.
Yeah.
It's like attract a different audience. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, there's some colors in your paperback that are similar to Sarah's. While the two of you talk, I was going to try to look that up, but I'm nervous about my technology. Pamela, can you tell us a little bit about your novel, like an overview for the readers? Thanks.
Absolutely. So yes, as you mentioned, Sarah, I love Victorian literature. I always have done. It was my field of studies. I have a master's degree looking at the 19th century. And the Bronte sisters were really up there among the writers that I love to read the most. So Charlotte, Emily, and Anne, books like Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights that many of us grew up with. And the Bronte sisters had a brother, Branwell Bronte. He was an alcoholic, an opium addict, a failed artist, a failed writer. He died tragically young, and the deaths of his siblings followed very quickly afterwards in the case of Emily and Anne and Charlotte a few years later. And one woman who was blamed for Branwell's demise, as women often are, was his employer's wife, a woman named Lydia Robinson, with whom he was rumored to have had an affair. She was married. She was a mother of 5. One of her children died tragically young. 4 were surviving. And Anne Bronte was the governess in her household, while Branwell Bronte was the tutor. And so she's really been the villainess of the piece. Ever since, Bronte fans have kind of said this awful woman, Lydia Robinson, ruined Branwell's life and maybe precipitated the end of his life. And so, of course, I decided to write a novel telling her side of the story. So Bronte's Mistress is written in the first person. It gives a voice to Lydia. I certainly didn't make her into an angel in the piece, but I really used the book to try to explore what were the choices for a woman in an unhappy marriage in this period when she had no property rights, did not have easy access to divorce, couldn't even vote, and had been raised her entire life with the educational goal of nabbing that man and being a wife and a mother. So that's what it's all about. And I do want to say that for fans of the Brontes, there's lots of Easter eggs in here, but you don't have to be a fan of the Brontes to enjoy the book.
That is such a wonderful overview. I'm so excited. I wanted to let you know that a few comments that came across for Victorian Lit is so wonderful and welcome. So with that, I was going to ask first Finola and then Sarah, if you would read a excerpt from your novels that might have an emotional tie to you. And we'll start with you, Finola.
Yeah, I can take it away. I'm going to read from pretty early in the novel, so there's not any spoilers there. I'm excited for you to read it in upcoming months. All you need to know is that Lydia, her husband is Edmund. They're having a very rough patch in their marriage, and they've just had an argument following an Easter dinner at her terrible mother-in-law's house. And so Lydia storms out of the house, and she goes to the monk's house, which is a smaller house on the grounds, where Branwell Bronte, the dashing new tutor, is staying. I walked until I reached the monk's house, which was shrouded in darkness. The Sewells, like most of the other servants, had not yet returned. Only one light burned in one of the upper rooms, Mr. Bronte's room. Would he be preparing Ned's lessons or reading a letter from Charlotte or Emily? There was a chance he was tinkering with his poetry. Whatever the pattern of his solitary hours, he would decide everything were I to come to him, were I to let him see me with my face red and tears in my eyes. And it wouldn't just be for manners' sake. He would understand. But I couldn't go in, could I? Just about visible through the gloom was the white statuette of the monk himself. The figure, who'd worn so low it covered his face, had watched over the entrance to the monk's lodge for centuries from his niche above the door. One of his hands was raised, making the drapery of his robes uneven. I hadn't thought it before, but perhaps his hidden gesture was a warning or a threat, not a blessing. The front door opened at my touch. I stepped inside. It looked the same, narrow, uncarpeted, with low, dark beams and an uneven central staircase. The hallway was empty except for a stand which held a broken umbrella and a pair of Tom Sewell's discarded boots. I had not been in the monk's house above a handful of times since the morning after our honeymoon. Edmund had led me by the hand from building to building and from room to room of my new home. You are mistress here and also here, he'd said. The bells of Holy Trinity have been ringing out your arrival. They will fete you in the villages. He twirled me so hard I nearly fell, but then caught me just in time and pushed me up against the wall to kiss me. I gave the place little notice then, for all it was a fine house, beautifully preserved and unmistakably English, with its sloping roofs and lattice windows. I'd cared only for the hall. I would drape curtains fit for the stage in my dressing room just to see Mother gasp at the expense. I'd take inspiration from the Venetian frescoes I'd just seen for our dining room. I thought then they'd never fade from my memory. And I'd commission a great fountain to make a feature of the stew pond. It's allegorical, I would say with a wave of my hand when my unmarried friends came to marvel at my good fortune. Edmund, my husband, can explain the mythological subject. But a month later, I was pregnant, sick to my stomach, and fretful when I slept. My grand schemes evaporated faster than Edmund's ardor and sounded as distant as Italy's opera houses. Soon, I was unable to either sit or stand with ease, and the doctor prescribed rest. My own mother came to nurse me, and Edmund's mother extended the time she was to live with us, reclaiming her dominion over the household. She, just as domineering then as she'd been tonight, hung floral chintz curtains in my dressing room, in the very same material she now had in her own. I'll stop there.
I just want you to read all night. Thank you for that. That was beautiful. I'm so excited. And I forgot to mention, we are going to feature your novel in May of 2022. I can't wait for that. Sorry it's so far down, but this concept that we have where one author refers to another, it just keeps building and it's fantastic. So we can go forever. And Sarah, it's your turn. Read to us, please.
Okay. So I'm going to read a little bit of a dinner scene when Virginia, my main character, is getting together with the 4 women faculty at Clarendon. She's not really friends with them yet. So there's kind of a lot of names in this section, but it's Louise, Helen, Corinna, and Lily are the 4 other women. So they are out for drinks and dinner. And this is Virginia's first time doing something like this since her husband has died. As the other women grumbled about Clarendon, Virginia relaxed a little. She'd been both grateful and irritated about the way her neighbors, Eileen and Gerda and the others, brought casseroles and soups, clucking at her. Wow, you've had a time of it, Virginia. Your accident on top of everything else. Or, I'm just so sorry for the 100th time, so she couldn't help but tear up. But tonight she wasn't with other wives. She was out with a gang of 4 drinking Chablis, and no one was clucking at her or saying it was for the best that the spring Northern Baroque class was canceled. Stuart Jakewith told me applicant numbers are down again. Louise passed the stuffed mushrooms. If Clarendon wants to keep up, they'll have to go co-ed. I can't see it, Corinna said. The alumni will drop a bomb on this place before they let that happen. The rest of the appetizers arrived, and they served themselves crab dip and meatballs. Lily was saying something about English department openings at Wisconsin and Northwestern. And Louise said nothing, though, Virginia noticed. Of course, Louise had tenure. She didn't need to look elsewhere for better work. Louise hadn't taken Oliver's job, Virginia thought now. She'd just gotten promoted faster. Your ankle bothering you, Virginia? Corinna asked. You look a little pale. Virginia took a sip of her wine. It's fine. She took another sip, bigger this time, and felt a sudden homesickness for Smith College. Not for the big rituals like Ivy Day, but for the smaller moments, the endless hands of bridge between classes, their heads wreathed in cigarette smoke, and the candlelight dinners where they solved the world's problems. They'd been brave, obsessed, hilarious together. At Smith, she'd felt powerful for the first and last time.
Wow. I remember that clearly. And any of us that have been through a tragedy, and the visitors do keep coming, it gets to the point where it's like enough is enough, right?
Yeah.
Sarah, do you have a
Yes.
question for our surprise guest, our future feature author, Fanula? To just a question specifically, author to author, that you can ask?
I have several questions.
Go for it.
So I guess the first one would be just where or when would you say that first glimmer came to be writing this particular story? Did you know, has that been percolating for a long time, or, you know, how did that happen?
Sorry, I was on mute. I was saying, no, it was more of a lightning bolt, the glimmer when it came for me on this book. I was reading Elizabeth Gaskell's biography of Charlotte Bronte, which was the first Bronte biography ever written. I'd read sections of it before. It had been quoted in lots of secondary literature, but I'd never actually read it. And I was sitting in my apartment. It was the fall of 2016. And when I came to the paragraphs when she described Lydia Robinson, calling her this profligate woman who tempted Branwell Bronte into the deep disgrace of a deadly crime, who is unrepentant, flaunting herself in London, this beautiful and very wealthy widow. I just stopped what I was doing and thought, well, someone has got to have written a book from her point of view. And so I turned to Google and I Googled to see if they had. And when I read that they hadn't, I just knew I had to write this book. And so I then did a full year of research before I started writing. I wanted to stay as close to the historical record as I could because the Brontes are so well known and so well loved. And I gave myself that deadline of a year because that's the sort of research project that could have you in forever. And then when I actually wrote the book, I did it in around 6 months, which for me is very, very fast. I had written a full-length book before. Like you, Sarah, that one did not make it to the shelves, but was a good learning experience. But yeah, I felt possessed by this story idea in a way that I haven't ever before or since. And I hope that I have a few more of those moments in my writing career because it felt wonderful.
Wow, that is amazing. Okay, so you referred to this a little bit, and I know that you've written about this as well. This is not about this particular novel. This is more about being a writer. And maybe you could talk a little bit about perseverance because, for so many of us, there is the novel or 3 or 4 in the drawer before you get the agent or the publisher. There's just, it can be such a long haul. Do you have what would you say about that?
I mean, first up, that's true. It's so quick route. And I think even people who are held up as overnight successes, when you talk to them, there's a lot of trials and tribulations and a lot of failures along the way that might not be part of that narrative. I saw, for instance, Erin Morgenstern, who wrote The Night Circus, says that every November when a lot of people do National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo, a lot of people tweet, oh, The Night Circus was written in NaNoWriMo. And she was saying, just to put the record straight, yes, I did a draft in that month, but then it took me a further 2 years, I think she said, to complete countless revisions, a lot of failure, a lot of rejection. And so just having that Insta success story is not the full picture. I think for me, one thing that helps is you have to really love writing, because then even if everything else isn't going well, then at least you're still enjoying it, right? And you're enjoying the work. I don't think this is something for people to do if the only enjoyment they get is from the marketing, the publicity. Once you have the book, like the majority of your time does need to be spent getting those words on the page and then scrubbing them out and doing them again and again and again. And so if you can find pleasure in that moment of doing it, even if there's a lot of surrounding pain that comes with rejection, I think that's incredibly helpful. For me, something else that helps is that I have another job as well. And I have other things I care about in my life. So my writing is, I think, most important to me aside from my loved ones. But at the same time, it's not the entire source of my self-worth and my self-esteem. So on the months where it's not going as well, I can say, well, you're doing a good job on your other job, or you're reading a lot of books, or you've been working out a lot this month, or any of those other things, which I can give myself a pat on the back. But ultimately, I think this industry is a really tough one, very long-term one, right? Like so many people don't, what's the average age of a debut novelist is in their 40s. And a lot of people write, well into their 80s and even beyond. So perseverance is part of the game. I don't know what you or anything to add or any more helpful practical tips than I've been able to offer.
Well, I think that's very well said. And I think it's important for writers as well as readers to know that it does take, I started writing fiction more seriously around the time I turned 40. Before that, I kind of dabbled, and I was doing a lot of magazine writing, and just didn't really have I don't know if it was a confidence thing or what, or maybe it was turning 40, now you're 40, you need to now or never. But there is this sort of disconnect in the way the media portrays debut novelists. I mean, you're very young, and that is really awesome. But as you said, many debut novelists are in their 40s and 50s. And
I was really the odd one out. I think in our group of around 200, I think there was only one that I know of who was definitely younger than me. And I felt like I was around a decade younger than most of the people in that group.
Yeah, it is. It's a long game, and there's no guarantees. So I think what you said is absolutely true. You have to come back to the writing and enjoy your time with the page, and even enjoy those struggles where things are not where you want them to be. And that's and to continue to be that reader that we all were when we were young, and just loving reading fiction.
That was actually it's almost like.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say it's like Sarah anticipated my question for her, because I was actually going to ask about the books that we love when we're young. And I know that not everyone starts writing, but I think most of us loved reading and loved getting lost in stories. So I wanted to know what the young Sarah loved, and were there any individual books that stand out to you as lighting that fire for your love of language and writing?
The two books that probably did that for me. There were other books that I liked a lot when I was little, like The Little House in the Big Woods, that Laura Ingalls Wilder series. But probably the two that did something sparky, like you're talking about, was, I would say, A Wrinkle in Time, and then the C.S. Lewis, the Narnia series. Even though I didn't grow up to be really all that interested in reading fantasy as a grown-up, those books were just, I don't know. But the weird thing for me as an 8-year-old, I did not understand that books were written by writers. And I don't think I was a dumb kid, but I just couldn't even, I could see the name. I don't know. I just didn't think books were written. I don't know. The books were just like these objects that I would read, and then I would read another one. So how about you?
That's fascinating. No, I think it's a really funny idea of just imagining books coming fully formed out of the universe for us. It'd be a lot easier that way. Yeah, I mean, lots of classic literature. I started reading, Victorian novels aimed at adults pretty early, like Charles Dickens and the Brontes, as I mentioned. But in terms of books for children, one writer I love is Noel Starfield. So The Ballet Shoes is probably the most famous, but there were others that Noel Starfield wrote as well, which I just thought were wonderful. There's a very strange book that I think the author's name is Claire, called 5 Dolls in a House, about dolls in a doll's house who are actually alive, which really lit up my imagination. One of my early short stories was also about in fact, I had a kind of horror twist on it where a girl shrunk and got stuck in a doll's house. But that idea really got under my skin as a child. But I was constantly reading, and like you, in my teens, I was reading a lot of fantasy. I remember Philip Reeve, obviously the Narnia series as well. I am, the generation of Harry Potter, so certainly always loved that series too. But I read voraciously, and I remember one family vacation when I ran out of the books that I brought and my sister had brought, read all the books my mother brought, her Jilly Coopers, her romance novels and all of that, and then ended up reading my father's business self-help book, because that was the only thing available to me.
Did that help you get into the business side of your life, maybe?
Absolutely not. It was, I don't know if you've ever read this book. It was Who Moved My Cheese, which I guess was very popular in the early 2000s.
That's your father's book? Or he wrote that, or he just had it?
No,
I remember that book.
No, absolutely.
I do too.
And yeah, so I was just a little perplexed as whatever I was, a 9-year-old, about what does this have to do with business? It's talking about mice and cheese. So,
Right.
yeah.
That's so funny.
funny. Well, speaking of children's books, thanks for the segue. Real quick, I'm just going to do a quick recommendation. Our virtual book club started back in 2020 when I was able to have a virtual book talk with the author Rebecca Dwight Groff. Originally, she was in Texas, and then she moved here to Beaufort. She wrote the fantastic novel Trouble the Water about Robert Smalls, an enslaved American hero. And then after she wrote that, she wrote this that I wanted to recommend to everyone for Christmas gifts for children, Stars of Wonder. By Rebecca Dwight Groff. And she was on here just a second ago. I know she was traveling, and I promised that I just told her I wanted to share this with everybody. I'm just going to read it real quick, and then we'll go back to us. Stars of Wonder is a fast-paced, courageous journey of 4 adventurous siblings who follow their brightest star in the night sky. Not knowing where their travels will take them or who they may meet along the way, they fight off dangerous animals and meet wise strangers as they overcome many unexpected struggles. As they travel hot desert sands by day and night, they become separated, lost, and must rely on their curiosity and courage, as well as trust and cooperation to attain their dream. So it is a beautifully illustrated book, and it's a children's novel, and I just recommend it. If you're looking for something to give a child, just go to Rebecca Bruff, BRUFF.com. So that's my little commercial tonight. But with that, we're getting close to our time up. I wanted to ask both of you, like I did before, Sarah, when you've been with me, is what is on your nightstand right now, or what is on your to be read list that you would like to recommend to our virtual book club members? And Sarah, go ahead.
Well, on my nightstand right now is a book that's not coming out until March, and it's called Fencing with the King by Diana Abu Jaber. I think she's a Jordanian or Palestinian novelist. So I'm only a little ways into that, but I guess if we're talking about books, what do I have here? I just want to, I know a lot of people know about this book already, and she doesn't need my recommendation, but Lauren Groff's Matrix is amazing. It's a book about a 12th century nun based kind of on Marie de France, the early poet, and it is not like any historical novel that I have ever read. And Lauren Groff's range is just so incredible. She I think started out as a poet. Lauren Groff, the novelist, started out as a poet, and in the language of this novel, you can really see that. But it moves along really fast. It's a page turner. If a novel that covers 50 years can be a page turner. I don't even know how to describe it, but it is so good.
Wow, that's wonderful. I want to apologize that the audio is kind of choppy. Sometimes that happens with StreamYard. I'm so sorry, guys. Just hang in there with us. So what are you reading, Miss Austin?
I'm currently reading Along the Infinite Sea by Beatrice Williams. So more historical fiction, really beautiful, set between just pre-World War II. But I'm sure the war is going to start soon. I'm in the middle of it. And then also 20 years later in the 60s. So really enjoying that. And then something else I've read recently that I highly recommend is a memoir called Sounds Like Titanic, which is a very bizarre story about a woman who was a fake violinist. So she was playing, but what the audience were hearing was a CD recording of a better violinist. So a very odd memoir, really well written. This is taking place in the US, in malls all over the country in the early 2000s. And she kind of links this into, what it's like growing up. She's a college student at the time, her background, her love of music, but also broader themes about what's happening in America in the period, the country's reaction to the 9/11 attacks, and also this kind of fake news, I guess, kind of thread comes up here about people believe what they want to believe when they're hearing this beautiful music playing and seeing someone on stage, even if their bow isn't moving quite in time.
Oh,
Wow.
that's interesting. So I have one more question, then I promise we're going to go. If you could gift, that was like recommendation of what you're reading now, but if you could gift one book to your significant other or husband or spouse as a love letter to them, what book would that be? And I can talk a little while you think about it. If you need to. Yeah.
That's tough for me because my husband really doesn't ever read fiction. So, I mean, he has read my novel. He read it, kind of in earlier form. Yeah, I really would have to think about that. Wow.
Yeah, I'm also dating someone who's not a big reader, but I can say just my favorite book of all time, which is really beautiful. Again, someone who's a poet and a novelist, is a 1940s novel by a woman named Elizabeth Smart, but not the woman who was kidnapped. And the title is By Grand Central Station. I Sat Down and Wept. And I don't know if I'd gift that to a significant other because it's not like the love affair that book talks about has a happy ending, but it's some of the most beautiful poetic prose I've ever read, talking about what the feelings are of being desperately in love. And this is a book where none of the characters have names. We are vaguely aware of a plot with a love triangle of her being in love with a married man and she becomes pregnant, but it's all about the prose. It's all about the language. And for people who love words, I'd really recommend it.
Wow.
That's wonderful. Did you think of something, Sarah?
I think I would give him something that's also historical fiction. And this is not really a very good love letter, but it's more about, I have to say more about my love of writing. There's the novelist Kate Atkinson had a novel called Life After Life. And I just think it's kind of speculative historical fiction and strange and beautiful, but also not that strange. And then she followed it up with a kind of a sequel that was just this very quiet. I would have him read both of those actually, because I think that would be less about, it's more about the love of writing and what a novel can be, because they're both two of my very favorite books.
That is wonderful. And I'm sorry if I stumped you guys. I just, for some reason, when I was talking about Rebecca's book, The Stars of Wonder, the children's book, I was just like, I think I've heard that question somewhere else before and it just came to me. But tonight, right now, I want to say thank you so much to you, Sarah, for coming on with me 3 times. I want to wish you happy holiday season. Stay bundled up there. And I cannot wait to read Finola's book in May. And I wanted to say, just have a closing sentence or whatever you'd like to say, and then I'll say bye to you two. If you have time, hang out in the studio because I'm going to do real quick book club business. But if you have to go, I'll catch you some other time. But at that point, I just want to say thank you so much from my heart for creating works for readers to enjoy and to learn from, for self-growth or just enjoyment. We really appreciate it. So write that that way. Finola, you go ahead and do your closing remark, and then I'll have Sarah do hers.
Well, yeah, thank you again for having me. This was a wonderful conversation. I could have chatted to you both all night. So Sarah, thanks again for recommending me for this. And I'm really excited for everyone to read Bronte's Mistress and to come chat to you again. And I guess my closing thing would be, I think no matter what the book is, books are the best gift this holiday season. So get buying books. If you still have some last minute gifts to give, consider ordering from bookshop.org because that splits the profits with independent bookstores, or going to your local independent store. And I hope everyone has a lovely holidays and get some reading in.
Thank you so much. And Sarah.
Yeah. Well, Susie, I just want to say thank you for starting this book club because it was such a good idea and you stepped into the breach during the pandemic and have made space for writers and readers. So thank you. You've been such a support and it's been really heartening to see all of these things like your group that have sprung up and they're still going. So I love that. So thank you. And I guess I would echo Fanula. I would say the same thing. If you who are watching, I know you guys are readers and you probably buy lots of books, but think about books as gifts. I love to give books as gifts, and I love to just go into my bookstore and poke around and ask. And usually they have good suggestions, even if I'm not even sure what I'm looking for. So that would be my suggestion for this pandemic season and next holiday season that we still seem to be in this pandemic. So yeah.
Hopefully by May it'll be all in our past, right? Hopefully. Thank you, ladies, so much. Have a happy holiday season, and I'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thank you. So, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with us tonight. That was a delightful conversation. I wanted just to real quick give you where we are and what we're doing because we got a little bunched up a little. We wanted to make sure everyone who had ordered a personalized copy of Sarah's novel, that they received it and had time to read. I know some of you read so fast, you're like, what's next, Susie? What's next? So I just wanted to try to share my screen real quick with you. I'm horrible at doing this usually, so bear with me just a second. Hopefully you can see maybe you can't. Oh yeah, you could. Okay, good. So let me do that again, just a second. Where did it go? I lost it. Sorry. See, this is what happens. I get all nervous. So I will stop sharing with that and try. So currently, this very moment, we're reading This Tender Land by William Kent Kruger, and we will be having that meeting with him December 21st. Again, our live virtual meeting will be December 21st to discuss This Tender Land by Kent Kruger. We are also reading Pamela Terry's The Sweet Taste of Muscadines, and she was introduced to us by Patty Callahan, if you recall, and I do have her website right here, so you can take a peek of the book cover. So The Sweet Taste of Muscadines is what we're reading in December, but you have time because we won't be meeting until late January to discuss that with Pamela Terry, our referral from Patty Callahan. And then if you're still with me, let's go back to StreamYard. There we go. So then in January, this is where I'm so excited, you guys. This is when we're going to go to read the Pat Conroy novel, The Water is Wide, which is was inspired by Defusky Island down here in the Low Country. We will read this in January. In the month of February, the executive director of the Pat Conroy Literary Center, Jonathan Howe, will be facilitating the meeting that we do here. And then in March, for many of you, you will be attending my inaugural Low Country Literary and Leisure Getaway to Beaufort, South Carolina, with multiple author events and tour expeditions and things like that, where we're going to bring this book alive and have an author panel on a Saturday on March 12th that's free to the public here. It's called Friends of Pat Conroy. We have his two friends that are authors that were students at the Citadel with him, his own student from high school who's now a author, and his literary agent will be part of that. And you guys, were having wine and cheese biscuits by the cheese biscuit queen, who has a recipe book that she'll be offering. So that's going to be a lot of fun in March. If any of you are interested in coming from your parts of the country to the Low Country for the entire getaway, I've had 2 spots open up. It's maxed out at 14, but we have a trio of events that are fundraiser events for the Pat Conroy Literary Center, and we're allowing about 35 people to one and 50 to another. So if you want to make books come alive, please join me and send me a message for that. So I'm going to let you go at this point. Happy holidays. I will see you before Christmas when we talk about This Tender Land with William Kent Kruger, or as he says, call me Kent. Anyway, good night, everybody. Happy reading. Bye.